At a crowded retired police dog auction, a little girl walked in alone, her tiny hands trembling, her red shoes dusty from the long road she had taken, just a tear-stained face, shaking hands, and a photo clutched tightly against her chest. Every head turned in confusion. What was a child doing at a retired police dog auction? No one expected what happened next. She suddenly burst into tears and ran toward a starving German shepherd sitting quietly inside a rusted cage. The room fell silent as she wrapped her arms around the retired police dog. A dog everyone else had ignored, because he was broken. People whispered, confused. Who was she? No one knew. Her eyes flooded with tears as she whispered, "I'm here for you." The entire auction fell silent. What happened next shocked everyone. Stay with us, because this story will leave you speechless. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country, name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The old wooden barn echoed with restless chatter as people shuffled inside, brushing dust off their boots and adjusting their jackets against the cool morning air. Sunlight filtered through the long, narrow gaps in the roof, casting golden beams across rows of metal cages lined up like cold, unforgiving prison cells. Inside them sat retired police dogs, once heroes, now waiting to be sold to whoever raised a numbered paddle the highest. Some wagged their tails weakly. Others lay still, confused by the noise around them. The auctioneer, a broad man with a booming voice, tapped his clipboard against his palm. "All right, folks, settle down. We'll begin with K9 117. Strong tracker, excellent obedience record." The crowd surged closer. Boots thumped. Conversations rose. It felt more like a livestock sale than an auction of loyal partners who had once risked their lives for others. Near the back of the barn, the large, overhead fan rattled, stirring the smell of hay, metal, and old memories. Officers in uniform stood among civilians, some with curiosity, others with indifference. A retired sergeant shook his head quietly. "Never thought I'd see the day," he muttered. As the auctioneer lifted the first paddle number, the barn door creaked open. At first, no one noticed. A small figure stepped through the entrance, hesitating as she looked at the sea of adults towering over her. Her red canvas shoes were dusty, her denim jacket slightly oversized, the sleeves pushed up to reveal trembling wrists. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old. Her long braids swung behind her as she clutched something in her pocket, something she was afraid to let go of. Slowly, a few heads turned. "Is that a kid?" someone whispered. "She's alone?" The auctioneer paused, confused. Children never came here. This was no place for them. But the girl didn't seem to care about the stairs. She walked, straight down the center aisle, her small footsteps echoing louder than the murmurs rising around her. Her eyes scanned every cage, every dog, every exhausted pair of eyes behind the bars. With each step, the tension in her shoulders grew. She bit her lip hard, fighting tears. Someone she was searching for was supposed to be here. The crowd parted unintentionally, making a narrow path for her as curiosity rippled through the room. The auctioneer lowered his clipboard, watching her with narrowed eyes. In this loud, crowded barn full of strangers and forgotten heroes, a little girl had arrived with a purpose no one understood. Not yet, but they were all about to. The little girl didn't speak as she moved deeper into the barn, weaving between adults who stared after her with puzzled expressions. She wasn't intimidated by the crowd, though her small hands trembled slightly as she brushed past a man adjusting his auction paddle. She kept her gaze low, focused, determined, like every second mattered. Her name was Lily Hayes, though no one here knew that yet. She reached the second row of cages, breathing shakily as dogs barked, whined, and pressed against the metal bars. Their tags clinked with each movement, each sound making Lily flinch. But she didn't stop. She pulled something from her jacket pocket, unfolding it with trembling fingers. A photograph. The edges were worn, softened from years of being held too tightly. In the picture stood a smiling man in police uniform, kneeling beside a strong German shepherd with amber eyes filled with loyalty. Lily swallowed hard as she traced her thumb over the dog's face. "Daddy," she whispered to herself, though no sound carried beyond her lips. She folded the photograph again and tucked it close to her heart. A woman standing nearby exchanged a confused glance with her husband. "Poor thing looks scared," she murmured. "Who brought her here?" he asked. "Kids don't belong at these auctions." But Lily ignored the voices. She wasn't lost. She wasn't confused. She had a mission, a promise, a purpose that drove her tiny feet forward even when her legs felt weak. She stopped at each cage, peering inside with hope flickering in her tear-stained eyes. For a moment, her breath caught, only to release again in quiet disappointment when the dog inside wasn't the one she sought. A retired officer in the crowd watched her closely. His brows furrowed as he noticed the photo peeking slightly from her jacket pocket. Something about her posture, shoulders pulled tight, chin trembling, eyes darting desperately, struck him with familiarity. "She's not here by accident," he murmured. Lily wiped her eyes quickly and continued. Her braid bounced softly as she moved from cage to cage, whispering the same name under her breath each time. Shadow. 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 She searched with the desperation of someone who had been waiting far too long for a miracle. Every cage she passed chipped away at her hope, but she kept going. Somewhere in this barn, behind one of these metal bars, was the only thing she had left of her father. And Lily Hayes wasn't leaving without him. Long before Lily ever stepped into the noisy barn, before her red shoes carried her across the dusty floor, there was a home filled with laughter, a home where her father's uniform hung proudly on the wall and where stories of bravery were told at the dinner table. Officer Daniel Hayes wasn't just a police officer. He was the officer everyone in town knew, the one who stayed late to help victims, who volunteered at school events, who always came home with a tired smile but made sure Lily felt like she was his entire world. And he never went to work alone. At his side was K9 Shadow, a strong German shepherd with sharp instincts and a gentle heart reserved only for those he trusted. Officers praised Shadow for countless rescues, successful tracks, and his unwavering loyalty. But Lily remembered him differently. To her, Shadow wasn't a hero. He was family. She remembered how he used to nudge open her bedroom door at night, placing his head on her tiny lap whenever she felt scared. She remembered her father laughing softly, saying, "Looks like you found yourself a second guardian, kiddo." But the memories darkened the morning everything changed. Lily had been eating cereal when there was a knock at the door, 3 firm knocks that made her mother stiffen. A police officer stood on the porch, his hat clutched against his chest, eyes filled with sorrow. Lily didn't understand at first. She watched her mother crumble to the floor, watched the cereal spoon slip from her own hand, watched the world go silent. Officer Daniel Hayes was gone, taken in the line of duty, and Shadow. Shadow never came home. The department reported that the dog had been injured during the incident, emotionally unstable, unpredictable. Lily didn't know what that meant. All she knew was that the dog who had slept beside her bed, who had guarded her father through storms and gunfire, had disappeared. She clutched her father's folded flag at the funeral, her eyes darting toward every police car that passed, hoping to see the familiar shape in the back seat. But Shadow never appeared. Officers whispered that he had been relocated, evaluated, and kept away for safety reasons. One night, weeks later, Lily crept into her father's closet. She found his old badge, the one he let her hold when she felt brave. Behind it was a photograph, her father kneeling beside Shadow, both looking proud, both unaware their time together would be cut short. On the back, in her father's handwriting, were the words, if anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll find Shadow." Lily pressed the photo to her chest, tears soaking its edges. From that moment on, she carried a purpose inside her heart, a quiet, burning promise, and now, standing in the crowded auction barn, searching cage after cage with trembling breath, she was finally close, closer than she had ever been, to fulfilling the last wish of the father she would never see again. Lily never meant to overhear the conversation. She had only gone to the police station to drop off flowers, small white ones she picked from the backyard, the kind her father used to place in a tiny vase on the kitchen table. She walked quietly through the hallway, her footsteps barely making a sound. Most officers knew her. They gave her soft smiles, gentle nods, and looks filled with sympathy. But as she passed the open door of the K-9 unit office, she froze. 2 officers stood inside, speaking in low, serious tones. "Shadow's on the list," one of them said, tapping a document on the desk. Lily's heart skipped. "The retirement auction?" the other asked. "Yeah, they classified him as unstable, too unpredictable after the incident. Nobody wants to take responsibility for him. The department can't keep him." Lily's breath stopped completely. Shadow. Her shadow. Her father's partner. Her last connection to him. Being sold? She pressed her back against the wall, trying to make sense of the words. Unstable. Dangerous. They weren't talking about the same dog. They couldn't be. Shadow was gentle, protective, loyal. He had once refused to leave her bedside when she was sick with the flu, whining until her father carried him out of the room. How could a dog like that be unwanted? The first officer sighed. Poor thing hasn't eaten properly in days. Keeps pacing, whining, staring at the door like he's waiting for someone who's never coming. Lily felt the ache explode in her chest. He was waiting for her father. The second officer added, "The trainer says if no one bids on him, he might end up in private security. They're the only ones who buy aggressive retirees." Aggressive? She nearly cried right there in the hallway, but she bit her lip so hard it hurt. She couldn't let them see her. Not yet, not before she had a plan. She waited until the officers walked away before stepping into the empty room. Papers lay scattered across the desk, but one caught her eye immediately. A printed auction list with numbers, names, and notes. Her eyes traveled down the page until she saw it. K9 2224. Shadow status. Unstable, recommended buyer, private security. Her small fingers clenched the paper edge so tightly it wrinkled. Shadow wasn't dangerous. He was grieving, just like she was. That night, Lily sat on her bedroom floor with the photograph of her father and Shadow spread across her knees. Her breath trembled, but her decision was clear. No matter what the world said about him, she was going to that auction, she was going to find him, and she wasn't leaving without him. Lily sat on her bedroom floor long after the house had gone quiet, the soft glow of her nightlamp casting a warm circle around her. Shadows stretched across the walls like memories trying to touch her, trying to remind her of everything she had lost. In her lap lay the photograph, creased, faded at the edges, and worn thin from the countless times she'd held it. Her father had given it to her on her 7th birthday. She remembered that day perfectly, the smell of pancakes, the sunlight through the kitchen curtains, and her father's laughter filling the room like music. He had lifted her onto his lap, holding the photo out with a proud smile. "This," he'd said, tapping the picture of Shadow with his calloused finger, "is the bravest partner I've ever had. And you, Lilybug, are the bravest daughter." Lily had giggled at the nickname, hugging the photo to her chest. That was the first time she noticed something written on the back, just a few words in her father's neat handwriting. She hadn't understood them then. But now, they meant everything. She turned the photo over. "If anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll find Shadow." Her chest tightened every time she read that sentence. At first, she thought her father had written it as a joke, an officer's random thought, a silly message. But after the funeral, she understood. He had known the risks of his job. He had known there might be a day when Shadow would be alone, confused, and abandoned by the world he had served. And her father had chosen her, his little girl, to protect Shadow if that day ever came. Lily traced the words with her fingertip, swallowing the lump forming in her throat. She whispered softly, "Daddy, I promise, I won't let him be alone." She kept the photo close at all times. It slept beside her pillow at night. It hid inside her backpack at school. It traveled in her jacket pocket everywhere she went, folded neatly with the words facing inward, pressed close to her heart. It wasn't just a picture, it was a mission, a responsibility. A final message from a father to his daughter. As she lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling, she imagined Shadow curled at her father's feet, waiting for a command, a sign, anything to bring them back together. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, gentle and warm. "Find him, Lily." She blinked away her tears. And the next morning she stepped onto the road toward the auction barn, ready to fulfill the last promise she would ever make to her father. Lily's steps grew slower the deeper she walked into the auction barn. Every cage she passed was another punch to the heart. Dogs with tired eyes, dogs who once ran through fields and alleys with pride, now reduced to silent shadows behind steel bars. She whispered Shadow's name under her breath again and again, each whisper carrying a little more desperation, a little more fear. What if he wasn't here? What if she was already too late? Her fingers curled tighter around the photograph in her pocket, grounding her, reminding her she had come too far to turn back. She wiped her eyes, lifted her chin, and continued. Halfway down the last row, she stopped. Something, instinct or memory, pulled her attention to the far corner of the barn where a cage sat slightly apart from the others. The tag hanging from it read, K9 Horidentoi 4. Her heart thudded. The dog inside lay motionless, his head resting on his paws, his fur dull and unkempt. His ears drooped. His tail didn't move at all. He looked like he had given up on the world long ago. The light from the roof landed across his back, revealing a few scars Lily had never seen before. Her breath caught. Her knees weakened. "Shadow," she whispered. The name left her lips so softly that no one else could have heard it. But the dog's ear twitched. Lily took a cautious step closer. "Shadow, it's me." The dog's body stiffened, a tremor running through his muscles. Slowly, painfully slowly, he lifted his head. His amber eyes were clouded with exhaustion, grief, and confusion until they landed on her. Then everything changed. Shadow pushed himself up on trembling legs. His breath hitched, his nose twitching as he leaned toward the bars. For a moment he looked uncertain, as if afraid his eyes were lying to him, as if this was another dream that would disappear. Lily stepped right up to the cage, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I found you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Daddy told me to, and I did." Shadow let out a low, aching whine, one filled with recognition, longing, and heartbreak. He pressed his nose desperately through the bars, trying to reach the girl who once braided flowers into his collar and shared cookies with him when her father wasn't looking. Lily dropped to her knees. Shadow lowered his head too, pushing his face against the bars as hard as he could. His entire body trembled with emotion. Lily placed both hands on his muzzle, her tears dripping onto his fur. "I'm here, boy," she whispered. "I'm here. You're not alone anymore." Shadow closed his eyes, releasing a sound no one in the barn had ever heard from him before, a soft, broken whimper that carried years of grief and longing. Around them, the murmuring crowd quieted. People turned. The auctioneer paused mid-sentence. Even the dogs in nearby cages fell silent. Because in that moment, everyone could see it. The broken dog wasn't broken. He had simply been waiting. For her. For a long moment, nobody in the barn moved. It was as if time itself had paused, holding its breath while a broken dog pressed his face against the bars to reach the little girl who had once been his whole world. Lily buried her fingers into Shadow's fur through the narrow gaps, her shoulders shaking with relief and heartbreak. Shadow let out another soft whine, deeper this time, raw, trembling, filled with a longing that no one in that barn could ignore. His tail, limp moments before, gave a tiny, hesitant wag. Then, another. Soon it thumped weakly against the metal floor, as if remembering how to feel hope again. "Is that Shadow?" someone whispered behind Lily. "That's Officer Hayes's dog," another murmured. A ripple of recognition spread through the crowd. Officers who had served with Daniel Hayes exchanged stunned glances. Civilians who had heard the heroic stories leaned forward. Even the auctioneer, usually loud and unshakable, lowered his clipboard, blinking in disbelief. Shadow pushed harder against the bars, desperate to get closer. Lily pressed her forehead gently to his, whispering through her tears, "I missed you. I missed you so much." The barn fell so silent that even the buzzing overhead lights seemed muted. Then a man near the front shook his head slowly. "I haven't seen a K9 react like that in years." A woman beside him added, "They said he was dangerous." Shadow's soft, helpless whimper contradicted every word. One officer stepped closer, his voice thick. "He wasn't dangerous. He was grieving." Shadow shifted his weight and nudged Lily's hands, licking her fingers through the bars. His eyes, once hollow and defeated, now glimmered with life. Years of loyalty resurfaced in seconds. This was not the reaction of an unstable K9. This was the reaction of a dog who had finally found what he'd been waiting for. Lily reached into her pocket and pulled out the crumpled photograph. She held it in front of Shadow. "Look," she said softly. "Daddy told me to find you." Shadow stared at the picture. His ears lowered. His chest rose sharply as if he recognized the image, recognized the man he had lost. Then he leaned forward and rested his forehead against Lily's hand holding the picture. Gasps scattered through the crowd. The auctioneer stepped forward, clearing his throat, but his voice cracked. This is highly unusual." An elderly man in a faded officer's uniform wiped his eyes. "Unusual? Son, that's loyalty. That dog knows that child, and she knows him." Whispers filled the air. Sympathy, amazement, disbelief. But Lily didn't hear them. All she felt was Shadow's trembling breath against her palm and the warmth of the bond that had survived grief, time, and loss. "Don't worry," she whispered, stroking his muzzle. "I'm taking you home." As those words left her lips, Shadow let out a sound halfway between a bark and a cry, an explosion of emotion, relief, and recognition. And the entire barn understood. This wasn't just a reunion. This was a promise being fulfilled. For several long moments, the barn felt like a sacred place. Silent, reverent, suspended between past and present as Lily held Shadow through the cold metal bars. But reality came crashing back the moment the auctioneer cleared his throat, regaining the firmness in his voice. "All right, folks, let's move on," he said, forcing professionalism back into his tone. "Bidding for K9 224 begins at—" "Wait!" Lily's voice rang out, small but steady. Every head turned toward her. She stood with her hand still wrapped around Shadow's muzzle, eyes red but glowing with determination. "I want him," she said. The auctioneer blinked. "Little girl, this isn't a pet adoption. You can't just—" "He belongs with me," Lily insisted, her voice trembling. Shadow pressed his head against the bars again as if backing her up. A few people in the crowd murmured in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably. The auctioneer sighed deeply. "Kid, listen. K9 224 isn't like the others. He's classified as non-adoptable. The department sent strict instructions." Lily's heart squeezed painfully. Non-adoptable? Why? The man hesitated, glancing at his clipboard. Because he's been flagged as unstable, high risk, the kind of dog only specialized handlers can manage. His voice softened slightly. He's not meant for a home. He's meant for work. Tough work. Lily shook her head fiercely. He's not dangerous. He's only sad. A few people gasped softly at her bravery. Some smiled sadly. But the auctioneer wasn't done. He lifted the document in his hand. This dog has already been requested by a private bidder with clearance for high security training. A wealthy one. They put in a pre-auction reservation. Lily's stomach dropped. Shadow whined, sensing her panic. Who? She demanded, her small fists tightening. Before the auctioneer could answer, a tall, sharp-looking man in a black suit stepped forward from the corner of the barn. His polished shoes clicked against the wooden floor as he approached. A thin smile stretched across his face. That would be me, he said smoothly. The crowd shifted away instinctively, making space around him. His cold eyes swept over Shadow, then landed on Lily with condescending amusement. I placed a request for this animal weeks ago. Dogs like him are useful. His smile grew sharper, very useful. Lily stepped protectively in front of Shadow's cage. He's not a tool. He's family. Her voice cracked, but her courage didn't. The man raised an eyebrow. Family? That dog has no family left, he said bluntly. He's a retired asset, a working machine, and I intend to purchase him. The air tightened. Even Shadow growled softly, ears pinned back, sensing the threat. The auctioneer tapped his clipboard anxiously. Sir, please, let's begin the bidding. No, Lily shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. But the rules were clear, and for the first time, Lily realized she wasn't just fighting sadness. She was fighting a system prepared to take Shadow away forever. The obstacle ahead wasn't just unexpected. It was terrifying. The barn seemed to shrink around Lily as the suited man's words echoed through the air. Shadow's low growl rumbled behind her, but Lily didn't step aside. She planted her small feet firmly in the dirt, her shoulders trembling, but her gaze fierce. The auctioneer lifted his gavel. We're beginning the bidding for K9-224, starting at... Please don't. Lily's voice cracked, but it cut through the noise like lightning. She turned to face the crowd, wiping her tears with the back of her sleeve. Adults who once overlooked her now stared, uncertain, waiting. She took a shaky breath. My name is Lily Hayes, she began softly, and this dog is Shadow, my dad's partner. Gasps rippled across the barn. An officer in the back whispered, Hayes? As in, Daniel Hayes? Lily nodded, clutching the photograph tightly. My dad was Officer Daniel Hayes. He died last year. Her voice wavered, but she kept going. But Shadow was with him every single day. They protected people together. They saved lives together. Shadow stepped closer to the bars, his nose brushing Lily's shoulder as if encouraging her, grounding her. Lily lifted the photograph and held it high for all to see. This is them, she said, her voice growing steadier. My dad loved Shadow. He used to tell me stories, how brave he was, how loyal. My dad said Shadow wasn't just a partner, he was family. The barn fell into a heavy silence. Lily swallowed hard. When my dad died, Shadow didn't understand. He lost his best friend. And I lost mine. Her eyes brimmed with fresh tears. But my dad left me something. A promise. She flipped the photo, revealing the message. If anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll find Shadow. A few people in the crowd covered their mouths. Even the auctioneer hesitated, his gavel lowering an inch. Lily stepped closer to Shadow's cage, touching his muzzle gently. He's not dangerous. He's hurt. Just like me. Her voice softened, trembling on the edges. He doesn't need training or cages or scary men taking him away. Her gaze swept the crowd, pleading, desperate, brave. He needs home. Shadow whined quietly, pressing against the bars as if confirming her words. The suited man scoffed loudly. "This is ridiculous. You're letting a child stall the auction with a sob story." But no one moved. No one spoke. The barn was no longer just a place of business. It was a courtroom of hearts. Lily's final words trembled through the air. "Please, don't take him away again. He's all I have left of my dad." And for the first time that morning, the crowd wasn't looking at a little girl. They were looking at a daughter fighting for the last piece of her father's soul. The man in the black suit stepped forward, the polished heels of his shoes clicking sharply against the wooden floor. His presence alone seemed to darken the space around him. He glanced briefly at Lily, small, trembling but determined, then turned his gaze to Shadow with a cold, appraising stare. "Are we done with the emotional performance?" he said smoothly. "Because I came here to finalize a purchase." Lily flinched at his tone, but she didn't move from her spot in front of Shadow's cage. The auctioneer cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, let's handle this properly." The man smirked, lifting his auction paddle lazily. "Properly? Absolutely. Start the bid." But the crowd didn't respond. Many exchanged uneasy glances. Others stared down at their feet, conflicted. The man's eyes narrowed. He was used to getting what he wanted, and the hesitation annoyed him. "Let me make this very simple," he continued. "This dog is worth more than sentiment. Dogs like him are rare. High training, high obedience, high value. The fact that he's been classified as unpredictable only makes him more appealing for the work I need." Several people shifted uncomfortably at his words. "What work is that?" an older man asked from the back. The bidder smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Private security, high-risk operations, guarding assets, tracking intruders, and sometimes," he let the sentence hang, "more persuasive tasks." Lily's heart pounded. She didn't know everything he meant, but she knew it wasn't good. Shadow sensed her fear and pressed his body against the bars, growling low. The man laughed. "See? He's got spirit. That's exactly why I want him. No little girl can handle an animal like this. He's wasted on her." Lily's fists clenched. "He's not wasted on me," she whispered fiercely. "He loves me." The man rolled his eyes. "Love? Dogs don't love. They imprint. They obey whoever trains them. But this one—" He tapped the cage lightly with his knuckles. "This one will learn quickly enough once he's mine." Shadow lunged forward with a booming bark, startling the crowd. His teeth flashed, his muscles coiled. But his aggression wasn't aimed at everyone, only at the man threatening Lily. The bidder didn't flinch. He simply smirked. "See? Dangerous. And dangerous dogs belong with professionals, not children." A woman in the crowd whispered, "He's provoking him." Another officer nodded. "Shadow's protecting the girl." Still, the man raised his paddle high. 5,000, he announced confidently. "Let's get this started." The auctioneer looked torn, his hand trembling slightly. Do we have any other bids?" Lily's voice rose again. "Please, don't let him take Shadow." The man gave her a patronizing smile. "Life isn't fair, sweetheart, and today isn't your day." The crowd felt the chill of his words. But even in the face of cruelty, Lily stood her ground, small, scared, but unwavering, because the bond between her and Shadow wasn't just emotional. It was unbreakable, and this cold-hearted bidder had just ignited a battle he was completely unprepared for. The moment the man's cold voice echoed through the barn, 5,000. A heavy silence crashed over the crowd. 5,000 might as well have been 5 million. Lily stood frozen, her small chest rising and falling in panicked breaths. Shadow growled behind her, sensing the shift, sensing the threat creeping closer. The auctioneer cleared his throat, eyes flicking nervously from Lily to the bidder. 5,000. Do we have— I bid $2. The words came out trembling, barely louder than a whisper, but the entire barn heard them. Lily opened her fist. 2 coins sat in her palm, scratched, old, worn from being carried everywhere she went. Tears clung to her eyelashes, but her chin didn't fall. She held the coins out like they were the most valuable treasure in the world. $2, she repeated, her voice breaking. It's all I have. A murmur spread through the barn. Soft, sorrowful, stunned. The suited man let out a sharp laugh. $2 for a trained K9? Are you joking? Lily shook her head slowly. I'm not joking. This was from my dad. He gave me these the day before he didn't come home. Her hand trembled, but she kept it extended. He told me to keep them safe, and I have. But now, they belong to Shadow. Shadow pressed his head against the bars, whining, sensing her desperation. His tail thumped gently, trying to comfort her. The man scoffed. Do we not have rules? Why is this child still talking? Let's move on. Let her speak. The voice came from an officer standing near the middle of the barn. His badge was old, his uniform faded, but his presence carried weight. He stepped closer, eyes locked on Lily. The officer knelt in front of her. Why $2, sweetheart? Lily swallowed. Because my dad said a partner is priceless. He said Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was a hero, and heroes shouldn't be sold to people who don't care about them. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I know, it's not a lot, but it's everything I have, everything that's mine. The barn grew painfully still. Even the auctioneer's hand trembled. Young lady, this isn't how auctions work. You can't just— Why not? She cried suddenly, her voice echoing. Why can't someone who loves him more than anything get a chance? Why does money matter more than a promise? Her voice cracked, soft but devastating. Shadow barked once, sharp, protective, urgent. The suited man rolled his eyes. Enough of this nonsense. But no one was looking at him anymore. Every pair of eyes in that barn was fixed on the trembling little girl offering everything she had to save the last piece of her father's heart. For a moment, no one dared breathe. Lily stood there, tiny, trembling, holding out 2 worn dollars with a courage far too big for her small frame. Shadow pressed desperately against the bars behind her, as if he understood this was his last chance. Then a voice rose, from the crowd. I knew your father. Everyone turned. An older officer stepped forward, his uniform faded, his hair gray at the temples. His eyes were glassy, memories swimming behind them. He placed a gentle hand over his heart. Daniel Hayes saved my life once. Shadow saved it twice. Lily blinked, startled. The man nodded. They were heroes, both of them, and if Daniel were here today, he'd be standing right beside you. Another voice joined him. I remember Officer Hayes, too, a woman said, stepping forward with her hand on her son's shoulder. When my boy went missing in the woods last winter, it wasn't just officers who searched. Shadow was the one who found him. Her son, no older than 8, stepped out from behind her. He saved me, the boy whispered, looking at Shadow with quiet awe. More people stepped closer. A store owner raised his hand. Officer Hayes stopped a robbery in my shop. Shadow chased the thief halfway across town. A school teacher nodded. He volunteered at the school's safety day. Shadow let the kids pet him. He wasn't dangerous then. He's not dangerous now, another woman added softly. The barn shifted, emotion rising like a tide, building, swelling, spreading from one person to the next. What had started as a silent gathering suddenly became a chorus of voices defending a dog they all thought they'd forgotten. The suited man scoffed loudly. This is absurd. You're all letting emotions cloud your judgment. But now the crowd wasn't afraid to speak. A tall firefighter stepped forward, arms folded. "And you're letting greed cloud yours." Someone else shouted, "The girl should get a chance. Let her have him. Shadow belongs with her." The barn, once filled with doubt, now thrummed with conviction. People who had only come to watch the auction now stood united. The auctioneer wiped sweat from his brow. He had held hundreds of sales in this barn. Old. Tractors, rescued horses, retired police gear, but never in all his years had he seen a crowd turn into a shield around a child. He looked at Lily, at her 2 small dollars, at her shaking hands, at Shadow, who stood pressed against the bars, eyes locked on her like she was the only anchor he had left in this world. "Sir," the auctioneer said quietly, turning to the cold-eyed bidder, "I'm beginning to think this crowd wants something different today." The man scowled. Crowds don't decide auctions. But this time, they did, because everyone in that barn, every mother, father, officer, farmer, teacher, and child, felt it in their bones. This wasn't about money. This was about loyalty, about a promise, about right and wrong, and about a little girl who refused to let her father's partner be taken away again. For the first time, Lily wasn't standing alone. A whole community was standing with her. The barn's atmosphere shifted. No longer a place of business, but a battleground of hearts. Lily stood in front of Shadow's cage like a tiny warrior, while the community formed an invisible circle around her. The cold-eyed bidder scanned the crowd, jaw tightening as he realized the room was no longer his to control. The auctioneer looked torn, flipping through his papers as if hoping the rules would magically solve the situation for him. I understand everyone's concern," he stammered, but regulations. "Regulations didn't raise that dog," the gray-haired officer interrupted. "Daniel Hayes did, and that little girl grew up with him. That's a bond you can't manufacture or sell." Murmurs of agreement echoed around the barn. The bidder stepped forward, voice dripping with irritation. "Sentimental nonsense. This dog is unstable, aggressive, unpredictable." Before he could finish, a deep growl rolled through the barn. Shadow was on his feet now, not trembling, not broken, not defeated. His posture was tall, tense, protective, his eyes burning with purpose as he stared directly at the bidder. Hackles raised, shoulders squared, muscles coiled, Shadow looked nothing like the hollow creature he had been minutes ago. But he wasn't threatening the crowd, only the man who tried to take Lily away from him. The bidder smirked. "See? Dangerous." But the crowd didn't agree. "That's not aggression," a woman said. "That's protection." "He knows she needs him," someone else added. Lily placed a calming hand on Shadow's muzzle through the bars. Immediately the dog's growling softened. His eyes softened. He leaned into her touch like a lost soul, finally home. The barn gasped collectively. Even the auctioneer lowered his clipboard slowly, stunned. "He listens to her," he whispered. The bidder's eyes narrowed. "This is absurd. Dogs don't bond like this." "They do," the firefighter snapped, "and clearly he's chosen her." The bidder raised his paddle again. "I bid 6,000, and unless one of you plans on matching it, I expect this dog to be handed over." A ripple of anger moved through the crowd, but no one stepped forward. $6,000 was impossible. Lily looked down at her $2, her small fingers trembling. "Please." Her voice cracked. "Daddy told me to find him. I can't lose him again." Shadow pressed his entire weight against the bars, letting out a heart-shattering whine. The sound cut through every person in the barn like a blade. A grown man wiped tears from his eyes. A mother hugged her child closer. The auctioneer looked between Lily, the bidder, the crowd, the dog. His breath hitched. His decision was growing in his chest, heavy but certain. Finally, the old officer stepped forward and placed a hand on the auctioneer's shoulder. "Son, look around. You know the right choice." The barn waited. The bidder glared. Lily held her breath, and Shadow stayed perfectly, still, watching the auctioneer with unblinking trust. This was the moment everything would change, the turning point where rules bent and loyalty spoke louder than money. The air inside the barn felt thick enough to touch, heavy with tension, hope, and fear. Lily stood motionless, clutching her $2, her heartbeat pounding louder than the murmurs around her. Shadow pressed so firmly against the cage bars that the metal rattled, his eyes locked onto the auctioneer with a silent plea only loyalty could translate. The bidder in the black suit tapped his polished shoe impatiently. "Well," he demanded, "are we following the rules, or are we entertaining fairy tales today?" The auctioneer swallowed hard. Years of strict procedure warred with the sight before him. A grieving child and a dog who looked ready to tear down the world just to be near her. He lifted his gavel halfway, his voice wavering. 6,000. Going. Think carefully. It was the gray-haired officer again. He stepped forward, eyes burning with conviction. That man wants a weapon. She wants family. A murmur of agreement rose. The bidder scoffed. "Family? Don't be ridiculous. The dog is unstable, dangerous." But even as he spoke, Shadow turned away from him and nuzzled against Lily's hands, gentle, desperate, trembling with devotion. The contrast was unmistakable. The firefighter spoke next. "Sir, if you give that dog to him, you'll regret it. Look at him. Look at her. That dog isn't unpredictable. He's protecting his last living connection." A woman added softly, "You'll break them both if you take him away." Voices followed, one after another, a wave of humanity rising against cold logic. The auctioneer lowered his gavel again, torn, breath trembling. The bidder pressed forward. "You can't deny a lawful bid. Do your job." Lily stepped in front of him, small but unshakable. "Please," she whispered, her eyes glossy, with tears. "My daddy trusted me to find him. He needs me. And I need him. That man doesn't care about Shadow, he'll hurt him." Shadow growled at the bidder again, but one gentle touch from Lily made him instantly quiet. The barn fell silent. Every gaze turned to the auctioneer. He looked at Lily, at her tiny hand clutching coins, at Shadow's desperate posture, at the crowd united behind her, at the bidder's cold, empty expression. Finally, he took a slow, decisive breath. "For the first time in this barn's history," he said, voice firming, "I'm overriding the highest bid." Gasps exploded across the room. The bidder lurched forward. "You can't do that." The auctioneer held up a hand. "This isn't simply an auction item. This is a service dog, a partner, a hero. And heroes don't get tossed into the highest bidder's pocket." He raised the gavel high. "Sold." Lily's breath stopped. "To the girl." The gavel struck the wooden block, with a sharp crack that echoed like thunder. Shadow barked, once loud, triumphant. Lily's knees buckled as relief swept through her, tears falling freely. The bidder stormed out, fury twisting his features, but no one looked his way, because all eyes were on Lily and Shadow, a girl who kept her promise, a dog who finally found his way home, and a decision that changed both their lives forever. The moment the gavel struck, the entire barn exhaled as if a storm had finally passed. Lily's breath shuddered in her chest and her trembling hand covered her mouth. She could hardly process the words that had changed everything. "Sold. To the girl." Shadow barked again, loud, sharp, joyous. For the first time in months, he sounded alive. The auctioneer stepped back, his eyes misty, as one of the handlers moved to unlock Shadow's cage. The metallic clink of keys echoed like music. Lily wiped her tears on her sleeve, her heart thudding as the handler swung the cage door open. Shadow stepped out slowly at first, uncertain, fragile, limping just slightly. But the moment his paws touched the open ground, he lifted his head and locked his amber eyes on Lily. "Come here, boy," she whispered, her voice trembling. Shadow didn't walk. He ran. He crashed into her with all the force of a memory becoming real. His nose buried in her shoulder, his tail thumping wildly, whining and whimpering like a child finally reunited with a parent. Lily wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur as she cried openly, her small body shaking with relief. The crowd watched in silence, some wiping tears, others placing hands over their hearts. The elderly officer knelt beside them, his voice soft. "Daniel would be proud of you, sweetheart." Lily looked up, tears streaking down her cheeks. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I found him." Shadow pressed his forehead against hers, eyes closing as if he understood every word. The barn doors opened, letting in a warm gust of sunlight. The handler gestured gently. "Take him home, honey. He's yours now." Lily stood, her hand gripping Shadow's collar as if afraid he'd disappear again. But Shadow stayed glued to her side, matching her steps perfectly, guarding her with every breath. As they reached the entrance, Lily paused and looked back at the photograph in her hand. Her father's handwriting glowed in the sunlight. She lifted the picture to her chest, then looked down at Shadow. "Daddy, I did it," she whispered. Shadow nudged her gently, almost like he was saying, "He knows." The crowd parted as Lily and Shadow stepped outside together. The sunlight wrapped around them, warm, golden, hopeful. The world beyond the barn looked different now, less lonely, less empty. Shadow stayed close, his shoulder brushing her leg with every step. The cold-hearted bidder was nowhere in sight. The community, once strangers, now watched with pride as the girl and the dog walked away, both carrying the weight and love of a fallen hero. When they reached the dirt road, Lily stopped and knelt beside Shadow. She placed the $2 on the ground for a moment and cupped his face in her hands. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered. "I'm here now, and I won't ever leave you." Shadow licked her cheek, tail wagging gently. A promise returned. Hand in fur, heart in heart, Lily stood again, and together they walked toward the horizon, leaving the barn and all its battles behind them. A girl and her father's dog, two souls connected by love, loss, and loyalty. Together at last, and as the screen gently fades to black, the narrator's voice rises. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. And always remember, loyalty never dies.